If you have your Bible or a device, I encourage you to open up to 1 Samuel chapter 26. 1 Samuel chapter 26 is where we're going to go tonight. We are rapidly approaching the end of the book of 1 Samuel. Again, we're doing kind of a textual overview of 1 and 2 Samuel. We're in chapter 27. There is 31 chapters in 1 Samuel. Then we're going to jump right into 2 Samuel. And again, we're working our way through books of the Bible. In many ways, this kind of bookends what we've been studying on Sunday morning, looking at the period of the Judges. Again, 1 Samuel is really the transition point in many ways. Samuel has passed away at this point, but he was considered to be the last of the judges. King Saul is the first of the period of the kings. He's, of course, is still around at this point, is pursuing David. We'll see that again tonight. And then if you want to go ahead and start reading, 2 Samuel begins to deal way more, really exclusively more with David. And so we get much more of his story as king and things like this. Let's look in chapter 26 together. So if you remember, David has been evading King Saul. Saul is actively pursuing David, trying to kill him because he knows that David has found favor with God. The Spirit of the Lord has left Saul, has went to David. David is going to be king. And David continues to kind of evade. And so we're going to see here a shorter chapter, only 25 verses. We'll read all of this. But David is going to spare Saul's life again. And you might think, Keaton, this narrative just keeps going back and forth of, Saul or David on the run, Saul continuing to pursue. And I agree, there's a lot of back and forth here, and I think it's there by design. I think it's there to prove to us two things and to show us two things. I think it's there to show us God's preparation for David long before he becomes king. I think that's vital for us to interpret David's time as king, to see the beforehand. A lot of parallels there for us. And then also to kind of show the stark contrast between Saul, who again is Israel's pick as king, versus who David is going to become as God's pick. If you want a king, this is my guy, and we're going to see the difference there. All right, let's read the first 4 verses. Again, a little bit shorter of a chapter as we kind of wrap up 1 Samuel in the next few weeks. The Ziphites came to Saul at Gilboa saying, "Is not David hiding himself on the hill of Hachilah, which is at the east of Jeshimon?" So Saul arose and went down to the wilderness with 3,000 chosen men of Israel to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul encamped on the hill, which is beside the road to the east of Jeshimon. But David remained in the wilderness, where he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness. David sent out spies and learned that Saul had indeed come. Now, I want you to pay attention because, again, we're going to continue to see the stark contrast in David versus Saul. Again, Saul's going to have thousands. Literally, it tells us 3,000 of his best men. And as far as we know it, David still has his roughly 500 or 600 that he has had up to this point. And you might notice, and I want you to draw kind of your minds back. I made a notation in my Bible back to 1 Samuel 24. Because you remember in 1 Samuel 24 is when David has an opportunity to kill Saul. In many ways, Saul feels like it has a repentant moment, right, to come back to David. And we noted at the time, I think Saul was earnest in the moment. I think it probably is a commentary there on how difficult a change of heart can be to sustain, right? I mean, it's difficult to have it in the moment, but it's even harder to maintain that when that's probably not our natural inclination. I don't think it's Saul's natural inclination. Certainly at this point, he's somewhat manic at this point. We know the Spirit of the Lord has left him. There's a variety of things that what that means. Again, at bare minimum, spiritually, God has pulled his favor. But as we read this in a literary sense, in the historical, in all kinds of contexts, we get the idea that Saul is kind of losing his mind to some degree, right? He's becoming paranoid. He is becoming fixated on David. Now, some of that might be out of self-preservation, right? He believes and understands that David is next to be king. The irony is that David has so many opportunities, including chapter 26, to take Saul out and expedite his rise as king, and David won't take it. Saul is probably correct, not probably, he is correct in identifying David as he will be king next. If he'd have left it alone, we get no insights that David would have tried to speed that along any more than God had plans for it, right? Saul could have easily continued his tenure as king, stayed with the favor of God. David very well may have been the next king, but Saul continues to dig himself in a greater and greater hole based on his actions here. But back in 1 Samuel 24, starting about verse 16, is where we see Saul somewhat repent, right? David had an opportunity to kill him. He didn't do it. David is really demonstrating to Saul, that he had an opportunity, didn't choose to do that, but again, it didn't last, right? Because we're going to see this now really emphatically. The first 4 verses already tell us that Saul is actively pursuing David, trying to kill him. He had 3,000 versus David's 600, but it's interesting. We already see some of the military prowess that David had, even at a young age, right? You notice that he had 600 men, much more limited versus Saul's thousands. But what do you notice he does in verse 4? David's going to send out spies to learn where Saul is. The great irony, this book is full of it, is that Saul is continually bested, cannot figure out where David is to save his life, maybe literally. Right, he is doing everything he can trying to find David. We look back just a couple chapters, they were basically on different sides of a hill from each other. He doesn't know it. They're in the same cave together. He doesn't know it. But David, with just a few of his ragtag group, remember, these are not your A-list fighting team. These are the bottom of the barrel that David, through his leadership, is training up. But he is intimately aware, Scripture tells us, and we're going to find that out even more because David and one of his closest companions is going to waltz into the camp of Saul, have another chance to kill him, and won't take it out of respect for God and for the position of king. But he's going to take Saul's spear, very likely the spear that Saul tried to already kill him with twice, and a jug of water just to prove that he could have done it again. So David, even though he is on paper, got every disadvantage, he continually succeeds because of God's favor. So again, the fact that David sent out spies may seem inconsequential, but really it's just demonstrating physically what God has already made abundantly clear, which is David is going to have the upper hand in spite of what it may seem on paper. Right, you ever watch a boxing match and they give you the tail of the tape, right? They give you all the kind of the back of the baseball card, so to speak. David is less in every capacity, in experience, in size of army, in all the intangibles. But because he has God's favor and he continues to be obedient, he will continue to succeed. And that's what we're going to find again tonight. All right, let's read 5 down through verse 8. Now David arose and came to the place where Saul had encamped. Now notice in the original language, what it's literally saying is not that he sent a delegation. David himself got up and went and found where Saul was. Right? So make that kind of bracket verses 4 and verse 5 because they are intrinsically connected. David sent out spies to know exactly where Saul was, and then David, based on that information, got up and went to that location. Right? David himself. And David saw the place where Saul lay with Abner, the son of Ner, the commander of his army. Saul was lying within the encampment while the army was encamped around him. Now, I want you to pay particular attention here. David is going to come into the camp of Saul, make assessments of what all is going on. And if you're reading this saying, how do they not hear him? It's a great question. I thought the same thing. Look, if you look in the language, in the original language, it gives us some indication that God has given him either put the Saul and his army to sleep or given David some kind of ability, because we get the insight that There's no way and spend the amount of time that David's going to spend in this camp without somebody waking up, because it tells us that the whole army is still asleep, and asleep long enough for David and his companions to have a conversation about what to do and what not to do, and take Saul's spear and a jug of water, and nobody wakes up. That could happen, but really unlikely. Again, you're talking about thousands of men that are all going to be pretty tight together. So again, we don't know that for fact, but that does kind of explain some of how this is all able to happen and nobody wakes up. So David saw the place where Saul lay with Abner, the son of Ner, the commander of his army. Again, this is Saul's number 2 guy. Saul was lying within the encampment while the army was encamped around him. David said to Elimelech the Hittite and to Joab's brother, the son of Zeruiah, "Who will go down with me into the camp to Saul?" And Ashai said, "I will go down with you." So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there lay Saul sleeping within the encampment. So again, imagine this in your mind's eye. Historically speaking, we don't know exactly, but at the time, strategy would have dictated extra biblical documents as to other armies, how they would have encamped. You would have had kind of the commanders, the first level of command structure in the center, and then it would have built almost a donut kind of shape around them as they kind of lost seniority. So the private, so to speak, would have been on the very outside, and they would have worked their way in. So again, David has to cross basically every layer of army, general, soldier, all the way up to Saul himself. That's we don't know exactly, but more than likely, based on this description, that's how they would have been. So David went to army by night, and there lay Saul sleeping within the encampment with his spear stuck in the ground at his head, and Abner and the army lay around him. And Abishai said to David, "God has given your enemy into your hand this day. Now please let me pin him to the earth with one stroke of the spear, and I will not strike him twice." Now, I hope you'll pay attention to verse 8. Because if you remember back just a few chapters when they were in the cave and David had a similar opportunity, this exact language came up, right? You remember this. This idea that God has given your enemy into your hand this day. And again, put yourself in their shoes. It seems awful coincidental to them and even to a modern reader. Yeah, right? How can this be? Certainly if we go under the assumption that God allowed David and his army to work amongst them and nobody wakes up, God is clearly, through his providence, is on David's side here. And so they're looking at this saying, "Lord, he's given Saul into your hand this day." It's interesting that now he goes a step further and says, "Let me be the one to kill him." Right? He's giving him plausible deniability. Right? He says, "Let me be the one to take this spear and pin him to the ground. Let me finish it. You don't have to be the one." So we get the sense that his companions that were with him were probably there in the cave as well, because remember, David's kind of pushback there was God has not given the authority to be obedient to God. This is the Lord's chosen. So he's trying to say, listen, let's circumvent this. You don't have to do it. Let me be the one to do it. And this all can be over, right? Probably an enticing offer. We look at, again, Saul lay within the camp. Some translations, I know the King James and the New King James, say something to the effect of Saul lays in a trench. It's probably the right idea. It's the right wording. It's not the right idea in terms of what we envision in our mind. The better probably translation of that, again, is Saul lay within the camp. Again, because it's really not a trench. It's more of a barrier, right? The idea is that he is surrounded, right? But he's surrounded by people, more than likely. Again, that's the way the text kind of gives us an idea here. So David went to that place. And again, David is going to show courage. He's going to show boldness. But he's also going to recognize that God is leading the way here, right? God is the one that's providing this opportunity. This is not lost on David. And as more conversation happens, you're going to get that idea even clearer. Because David, once again, is going to say, God has a plan here, and I'm not the one to speed this up, right? But he's gonna come back to this idea, God has delivered your enemy. And we look at this almost poetic justice in some way, right? The spear that, again, presumably he threw at David multiple times is right here. He has an opportunity to use the exact weapon that has been used against him to end it. And David's gonna say no. Again, going back, go back to 1 Samuel 18, 10 through 11, chapter 19, 9 through 10. But all of this is going to come back in David's eyes to obedience to God. 9 through 12. But David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can put out his hand against the Lord anointed and be guiltless? And David said, as the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him, or his day will come to die, or he will go down in battle and perish. Again, saying, there's a lot of ways this can end, but it is not going to originate with me, right? He may go down in battle. He may die of old age. The Lord has the prerogative to take his life, but I, David, don't. A level of obedience that's really hard for us to put in perspective. Again, it's easy, they talk about, armchair coaches, right? It's easy for us to make calls sitting at home without the pressure, without, being there in first person. It's easy for us to look at David and say, of course, we would make the same choice. God's on your side. But put yourself in his shoes. Have your life threatened, really threatened, at least twice. Be on the run for an extended period of time without family, without being home. Live in caves. And this becomes a more enticing option. But David stays true to what he knows, which is, again, that God has a plan. As the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him. Verse 11, the Lord forbid that I should put out my hand against the Lord's anointed, but take now the spear that is at his head and a jar of water and let us go. So David took the spear and the jar of water from Saul's head, and they went away. No man saw it or knew it, nor did any awake, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon us. So again, we get the insight that don't know exactly how that works, but God provided for the day, right? God gave them some level of deep sleep to where nobody's waking up, right? They're allowed to move freely. Again, knowing that Scripture tells us that, we might be all the more tempted to think, God is clearly providing for this. God is the vehicle that's making this possible. Surely God would be okay with David taking Saul's life. But I suggest to you that this entire section, up into and even beyond David's time when he's formally put in as king, is all about training. It is. It's all about God utilizing situations that seem like a slam dunk to us to train David for even harder circumstances that are yet to come, which is when something seems obvious on paper, are you willing to be faithful even then? And David's going to learn how to do that. Again, not always perfectly, but he's going to learn how to do that. I love, again, do not destroy him, for who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? Again, David's going back to 1 Samuel 10, we read about this. He's basically saying the only person that is going to change the situation is God himself. That's it. And again, we look at this and we might be tempted to think, this is a period of kings and monarchs and so much that feels disconnected from our modern reality. But let's strip out all the nuance of 1 Samuel and we can easily place this nugget of truth in our own life, which is we like to be the decider of our own life. We like to feel like we're turning the levers that make the difference, right? I'm in control of the jobs I take, the jobs I don't, where I move, where I don't, who I marry, who I don't, right? What things are going to get my time and my money and my priority. We like to feel like we've got control of every knob and every lever because it's our life. We've earned it. But we look back and again, David had that same prerogative, maybe in some ways more so. But he's unwilling to speed up, to hurry God or to circumvent his plan in any way, can you and I say the same thing? Not to become king of Israel, but any other plan in our life, we try to hurry God on his timetable. I encourage you to go back to 1 Samuel 26, really 23, 24, 25, 26, which all points us to the same idea. It's only going to change when God wants it to change. The Lord will be the one to change this. Again, Romans chapter 12 and verse 19. Vengeance is mine, I will repay. Again, vengeance belongs to God. It doesn't belong to us. And that, in many ways, that should give you and I a simplified worldview. Not going to say an easier worldview, but a simplified worldview, which is that regardless of the wrong that may happen, vengeance or the obligatory, I've got to repay them for what they've done to me negatively, is just frankly not ours to do. It eliminates a lot of the decision making when that's not even an option for us. If we believe Romans 12, if we believe the same God that David believed in 1 Samuel 26, that one day he's going to handle all the injustice. He's going to handle the decisions that weren't made right. He's going to handle everything that we would label as unfair. It simplifies decisions for us because that one's off the table. I'd encourage you, I'm not saying it's easy, but that was David's prerogative. It's off the table. It's not even worth discussing. But David did do something strategic. He took a spear and a jug of water. He wouldn't kill Saul, but he wanted evidence that he had an opportunity to do it. Again, David had to notice that everybody remained deeply asleep, supernaturally asleep. So he took it upon himself to say, again, God is delivering here. Now, the beauty of that is he's not overreaching to say, oh, well, God's on my side. Let's just end this in terms of killing him. He says, that's going to violate. Yeah, God's provisionally giving me this, but that doesn't mean I get to just make up my own rules from here on out. But he is going to say, I want Saul to know that I had another opportunity. So he's going to take his spear and a jug of water. Starting in verse 13. Then David went over to the other side and stood far off on the top of the hill in a great space between them. And David called to the army and to Abner, the son of Ner, saying, will you not answer Abner? And Abner answered, who are you who calls to the king? And David said to Abner, are you not a man who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not kept watch over your lord, the king? For one of the people came in to destroy the king, your lord. This thing that you have done is not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die because you've not kept watch over your Lord, the Lord's anointed. And now see where the king's spear is and the jar of water that was at his head. David's putting him to the fire and again saying, look where the king's spear is. Look at the jug of water that was right here. Again, this is dramatic evidence. This is akin to him slicing the corner of Saul's robe and saying, look what I've got. He's talking to essentially his chief of security. He's saying, I waltzed into your camp. I took your king's most valuable weapon in his spear. I took the jug of water that was sitting right by his head. And who are you to question me? Again, David's kind of pushing back a little bit here. Again, undeniable proof that David had an opportunity to kill Saul and he didn't do anything about it, which is going to lead us into what happens in 17 through 20. Saul recognized David's voice and said, is this your voice, my son David? And David said, it is my voice, my Lord, O king. And he said, why does my Lord pursue after his servant? For what have I done? What evil is on my hands? Again, that's a line that David has used multiple times back to Saul. And he said, why does my Lord pursue after my servant? For what have I done? What evil is on my hands? Now therefore let my Lord the king hear the words of his servant. If it is the Lord who has stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering. But if it is men, may they be cursed before the Lord. For they have driven me out this day, that I should have no share in the heritage of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. Now therefore, let my blood fall on the earth away from the presence of the Lord, for the king of Israel has come out to seek a single flea, like one who hunts a partridge in the mountains. Again, David, he says, my Lord, my king, spoke to Saul with humility, right? David was right. Saul was wrong. But David comes still with that humility. What have I done? What evil is at my hands? Again, he wants Saul, you've heard me say this phrase before, he's demanding that Saul wrestle this to the ground. He has to. He's saying, Saul, if you're going to spend all this energy and money and time coming after me, at least tell me why. What have I done? What evil is on my hands if you're going to pursue me like this? Right? If the Lord has stirred you up, so be it. But he says, if it's the children of men, right? He's basically saying, if it's you, if it's ego, if it's anything but a direct imperative by God, then it need not be so. Again, giving Saul an opportunity to turn around. Again, David knew that God didn't begin this, but wanted Saul to work through this. They have driven me out this day, sharing in the inheritance of the Lord, saying, go and serve other gods. Again, David is talking here, is revealing his own struggle under the pressure of persecution. But again, he's saying, don't let my blood fall on the earth before the face of the Lord. Again, basically saying, Saul, don't kill me. There's no reason to, right? And I believe that earnestly as we look through the text. David had every opportunity to fight against, to kill Saul, and didn't take it. Verse 21 is interesting. Saul's going to come back somewhat repentant, but again, he didn't have the best track record. Saul said, I have sinned. Return my son David, for I will no more do you harm, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Behold, I have acted foolishly and have made a great mistake. Again, Saul has been in this situation before. He's overcome with emotion, but he did this again back in chapter 24. And again, we look through this and we see almost a difference in tone, right? You go back to read chapter 24, you get, as I read it, a more sincere. Saul really was, at least in the moment, repentant for what he did. I think here he's looking at David and saying, I've been caught, right? I've had my hand in the cookie jar and you caught me. So at least on paper, let's stop this, right? I've played the fool, right? But what's interesting, as we end the chapters, David's response back. Again, David is no dummy. Listen to what David says, 22 through 25. David answered and said, here's the spear, O king. Let one of the young men come and take it, and the Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord gave you into my hand today, and I would not put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Behold, as your life was precious this day in my sight, so may my life be precious in the sight of the Lord, and may he deliver me out of all tribulation. And Saul said to David, blessed be you, my son David. You will do many things and will succeed in them. And David went his way, and Saul returned to his place. May the Lord repay every man for his righteousness and faithfulness. Again, David is trusting in God to handle the portion that David can't. If you look in, again, Psalm 18. Psalm 18, starting in verse 20 through verse 27. We don't have time to read it. But he recognized that when he would become king, right, he recognized that righteousness, that doing the right thing, righteousness just simply means right living, right? He understood that God would reward that, right? Sometimes in this life, many times in the life to come, but it would be rewarded nonetheless. David's going to go on his way, right? Saul continues to invite David to return, but David's not going to take him up on the invitation. So there's three things as I see in in 1 Samuel chapter 26. Number one, honor God even when others don't deserve it. Again, David, and we've touched on this theme multiple times, but it's worth repeating. Again, David refuses to kill Saul again. He's unjustly hunting David for what some scholars believe is up to years. But he recognizes that Saul isn't good, but God is. That's a hard truth for you and I to wrap into our everyday life. Because you and I will inevitably, we will come across things this week, maybe tomorrow, where you and I look at it even objectively and we say, this isn't good, this isn't right, this isn't what it should be. And we're inclined to act a certain way or say a certain thing or not. My challenge for you is go back to 1 Samuel 26, because David would tell us it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the circumstance, the other person, whatever it might be, because all of it is going to be overshadowed by the goodness of God. Again, we don't honor people because they earn it. When we honor God by how we treat other people, especially difficult people, God rewards us accordingly. Number two, trust God's timing more than our emotion in the moment. Again, David has an opportunity to end this struggle immediately. This is not his first time, again, but he has an opportunity to do so, but he waits. The circumstances say, act right now. Take his life. Maybe even better, politically, let somebody else take his life. But David looks at it and recognizes that circumstances may say one thing, emotions may say one thing, but faith says wait. Obedience says wait. You know, many times, and this is a tough, there's nuance to this that's tough to teach, because not all opportunities are the will of God, right? So many opportunities are placed in our path, and to discern which ones are godly and righteous and which ones aren't, it takes discernment and wisdom, in some cases experience. But it also, again, we looked at it this morning, do we have the lamp that's illuminating our path? The Word of God that points us in one way or another. I read an interesting phrase this week that I was thinking about in connection to something else, but it applies here. Delayed justice is not denied justice. Right? We live in a culture, we want everything right now. Right? I caught myself the other day, I was looking at something online and it had like 3-day shipping, and I thought, what a heresy. 3-day shipping? Right? Is it 1999? What is happening? You've done this too, right? If we don't have it now, it's not even worth anything. But something that's delayed doesn't mean it's denied. And that's so much of our life is going to fall in that category of we may not see it on this side of eternity being addressed. Doesn't mean it's not going to be. God's blessings will come in their time, not ours. And then lastly, God will always vindicate the righteous. We don't have to do that ourselves. Again, we want things in our control, in our tactile. We want to feel it and touch it and grab it, and we want to be a part of it. But the reality is that David places his spirit and his will and his obedience all in the hands of God. To trust that God is going to vindicate God. He doesn't have to try to clear his own name. He doesn't have to defend himself. Most beautifully is he doesn't have to just secure his own future, because God is doing that for him. And I'm certain that David, in his wisdom, if God changed his mind, that would be okay. Because ultimately, it is the will of God that David wants to be adherent to. Again, God is talking to David in a really beautiful way. We don't have to fight every battle. God will defend his people far better than we can defend ourselves. Tonight, if you aren't a Christian, we always want to extend the invitation. Again, David steps out in faith. And again, you might look at 1 Samuel 26 and say, what does faith have to do with this? I'm going to suggest to you that it took more faith. Again, this might seem obvious, but it took more faith to not kill Saul, right? Killing Saul would have been the obvious choice, but it took way more faith to say it's not the time, and most importantly, it's not my prerogative. It's not my choice. When you and I have an opportunity to put on Christ, it's a great leap of faith to say, I don't have it all together, and I never will. But there's somebody that's already paid the cost for me. That's Christ. And you and I can access the waters of baptism. If you have any gospel need tonight, we'd love to learn about it if you'll come forward as we stand and as we sing together.